So, good afternoon and welcome to PentaBAR live again. This time we're in this enclosed group of teams because we want to share some special treats with you, mainly due to the resources that we have and the guest today. We have a very nice side of the subjects. And we'll talk about the human side of accessibility. I like this phrase a lot. More than 1 billion people in the world have the same some form of disability. And that means that 15% of the world's population would be affected by this. So the agenda of today would be maining these subjects. What is the accessibility? Misconceptions about accessibility, enlarging the spectrum, and the pyramid of user needs and the practical side of accessibility. We'll see how we'll go around behind the screen. There's also a user, and you have a responsibility for, that says Alex Moldovan, which is the guest today. And he is a UI UX developer at teleportHQ and the founder of JSHeroes. You might have heard about that because it's a big community. One of the biggest actually in tech community events in Europe, and they're running on subjects like this one. And he is on a mission to help and inspire others to build an accessible, secure, and fast web. And he's a regular speaker in all kinds of tech events, and I cannot wait to address him more questions. But before doing that, let's invite together Alex Moldovan with us, and then we'll address that. So, Alex, I think everyone can hear and speak to you. How are you today?
Yeah, hi everyone. Amy, hi. Thank you so much for the introduction. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining the session, and hope it will be useful as useful as it can be for everyone, and hope you will have a lot of things to learn from the conversation and from the things that I will show you in the next roughly 50 minutes, let's say.
Yeah. So from our previous discussions, I also entered the subject of making the accessibility human. So I was just wondering, what was your? I mean, how did you end up doing this? What's your story until getting here?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me because it's not the first time I speak about accessibility, or it's not the first time I mention the topic or advocate for the topic. And it's kind of one of those things that you see is a real necessity. Like you see that the community needs more. If you want, you need to be more educated in the subject, and at the same time, you don't see a lot of people talking about it. So I come from a non-web technical background. I started as a .NET desktop application developer, so I kind of slowly discovered the world of web development by myself. No one actually introduced me into it. And in the past 3 or 4 years, I kind of started rediscovering the world of web development through these different lenses of accessibility, performance, security, and all these, if you want, cross topics that kind of affect everyone, all the users of the web. So it's just something that I noticed, during going at events, looking at the topics that are usually presented on stage, looking at the different angles that technology is presented, and I kind of saw a lack of topics, a lack of talks, a lack of stories about accessibility. So yeah, and it's my belief that it's important to put it on the table.
So if you were to define this term accessibility to someone that haven't heard about it before, what would you say about it?
Yeah, so as a definition, kind of accessibility is the design of products, devices, or environment, services, any kind of digital product that and it's the design of those products specifically for people with disabilities. This is kind of the broad definition. And since you mentioned at the beginning the human side and like why the topic, a lot of people ask me like what's that? Why the human side? Is that if you take from this definition just the core terms, is accessibility is actually designed for people. You can omit the disability thing, because at the end of the day you can just consider that you're designing for a person, a persona, or multiple personas that have different ways of interacting with the web.
So I know that you mentioned exactly this kind of you had this phrase that sums it up, that 1 billion people in the world have some form of a disability, and I find that striking. So I'm wondering why are not more people into this field coding there.
I think it's mostly because in a way people don't. I think there are two main reasons. One is somehow the fact that whoever is developing for the web may not even know who they are developing for. They might not have a constant stream of information about the users, how the users are interacting with the app. They might not have access to analytics or access to maybe access to the product managers, the product owners that take the product further and interact with the users firsthand. But it's also a problem of certain misconceptions that exist about disability. And you mentioned the 1 billion thing. That was extracted from a report from the World Health Organization done in 2011. That was the first time that actually the World Health Organization did a global analysis on the topic of disabilities, like general disabilities. And you can think here everything from wheelchair users to unsighted users, or people with just bad vision, not necessarily complete blindness, or people with all sorts of disorders. And so that was back in 2011, and it is estimated that since then the number even grew larger because of various reasons, from general lifestyle to in general to the prolonged lifespan around the world. So more people kind of have all sorts of different problems that they live with, but they they kind of add to that number. So yeah, I would speculate that it's even higher than 15%, and I think it's an information that not a lot of people kind of is aware. Like if you tell a developer that there is a browser that has a 15% market share, they will probably start thinking about that browser and start working to make sure the interface is working well for that browser. But there is this kind of information is not necessarily available in the tech communities, as far as I know.
For sure. So I know that you have a presentation, and until you're preparing that, I cannot wait to put more questions up while we're advancing with that. But I want to open the floor to questions, because we're in this, we're not streaming live to Facebook for various reasons, but one of them is to have more intimate conversations and to have the resources that you have also in the deck to be able to track and email to everyone that's participating today. So I opened you have the Q&A sections here in the Teams, and you can ask any question there, and we'll address them as they appear and as the presentation is going forward. We want to create a conversation for everybody rather than me talking with Alex and you listening. I think your questions may be much more relevant than mine. So let's do that and have a cozy, learning moment for this hour of PentaBAR. If you can also share the screen.
Yeah, I will. Just a second.
Mm-hmm. And what I will mention meanwhile is that Florentina will help me with the questions in the Q&A. She's always there to help me with the questions, either in live or here. So you might see her messages in the sections for questions.
Yeah, so I already advanced to the definition, right, since we talked about it, and I was thinking maybe it's a good time to share one particular slide since you mentioned and I also mentioned misconceptions, and I think it's important to talk about some of these misconceptions because before moving forward, about the topic. Would that work for you?
Yeah. It's perfect like that.
So here's one of my favorite analogies with this. A lot of people come with an argument when you talk about with product owners, business owners, any kind of stakeholder in a digital product, and you hear this argument a lot that we are looking at the data that we have, and there is no we don't have a significant number of people with disabilities accessing our services. For example, they might say we don't find a lot of data in the analytics about people using screen readers to navigate our website. And this parallel I always like to make is from the Second World War, where the British military, the RAF, were trying to figure out how to best armor the planes that were fighting in the war. And it was one of the first times that they used computational power and started having statistical data. They were looking at what was happening in the battles and tried to react to that because the war lasted for 6 years. So at some point they started doing a statistical analysis on the planes that were returning from fights and seeing where the bullets were in those planes. And the first instinct was, okay, said we need to armor those specific areas, like you see here. So in this diagram, you would see a rough estimation of where they were finding bullets in the plane. But someone figured out that what they were missing from this was the planes that were actually never coming back from fights, and those were the planes that took the hits in the engine parts and in the cockpit area. Mm-hmm. So in a way, saying that our current users, in our current user base, we don't have people with disabilities, engaging with our services, is pretty much the same thing. You don't know that before you build actually the service that has this level of accessibility, because, and I will talk about this even later, accessibility is a fundamental thing. If you don't offer that, it's like a wall, for those users. They won't even be able to have the basic interaction with your service. So whatever else you build on top will be pointless from that perspective. Mm-hmm. This is something to consider in terms of misconception. There are, of course, a lot of other misconceptions, related to whether accessibility should be just a legal requirement or it's something that is actually more of a moral ethic thing to do. So I guess it's a big debate here, and I guess everyone can take a take sides and can develop their own arguments, but it's kind of crucial to get past these misconceptions and try to see what is the reality. And the reality is, as we already said, there is a huge market. If you want to talk in terms of market size, there is a huge market out there. There's a huge number of people out there that could benefit from more accessible interfaces on the web.
I'm seeing questions here, but I think I'll park it for later on. What are the best practices to roll out accessibility in design and development in an agile development team? So I think we'll respond through the presentation to that. So I think we'll park it for the moment, and now we're raising the awareness. But thank you for that, and keep them coming. We'll address them as they are.
Yeah.
Okay, can go forward, I think.
Yeah, I think the next point I wanted to bring, or the next thing I wanted to talk about is what's called the spectrum of accessibility, or the user persona spectrum. Because as I said at the beginning, we talked about like the official definition for accessibility is that it's for people with disabilities, but disability is not necessarily something that you have like a permanent disability. So the persona, the spectrum of accessibility is actually quite larger than that. And I can go on and maybe talk about just a few personas that I have in mind here. So I'm trying to make everyone understand that it can happen to you. It can be in certain situations, or for permanent, or for temporary periods of time. You can also be part of a group of people with disabilities, or you might be considered, or it might be considered that for some reason you will not operate, you will not interact with the interface in the same way as you used to. And there are a couple of examples like this. For example, I took here like a random persona, called her Alice, a mom with 2 small kids that not sure how many of our in the audience had this experience, but it's pretty hard to have both your hands free when you have to take care of 2 kids. And it might be a similar situation if you're not considering kids, for example, and you have a broken arm, or you have any kind of these temporary problems that kind of limit your way of interacting with the device you're having, with the screen, with the with the phone, with laptops, PCs, whatever. So in that case, having the ability to navigate with the keyboard might be essential for your experience, because otherwise it will be very hard, to keep moving your hands from the mouse to the keyboard or trackpad or whatever you have. Another example is a person, I called him Bob, a person that is, let's say, in his maybe 70s and still an active user of the internet. You might consider that, older people are not necessarily users of the internet today, but I'm pretty sure that like 30, 40 years from now, most of us here will still want to be, connected. We still want to be digital users, if you want. So,
and that's actually a growing market with the life expectancy.
Exactly.
For a lot of services and a lot of money. It's also in that market if we'll build up for the developed economies.
Exactly, and with old age come all sorts of problems that you have, like bad eyesight, maybe tremors in your hands. Maybe you have a hard time, figuring out how to, not figuring out, managing to click or to tap on the proper part of the interface if you have like a mobile device or something like that. So there are all sorts of problems that come with age, and are not necessarily a disability after all. They are part of your life. It's your just your maybe maybe I don't know what's called a disadvantage, but definitely not necessarily a disability from that perspective. Then another example, a lot of people actually don't consider this. I found it quite interesting. The first time I also heard it myself, and it makes sense that, you know, performance and the overall performance of websites and web applications are also an aspect of accessibility, because people, and in this case Charlie is my persona here, she might live in a country with bad internet access. It's either very slow or it's very expensive, and there are a lot of countries still, like, I guess for the people that are joining in from Romania, we don't have this problem because we have the privilege of having both cheap and fast internet, but a lot of countries in the world don't have that. And for a lot of people that live on 2G, you know, 3G connections, where they have to pay quite a lot of money for even a few 100 megabytes per month, you know, going on a website that downloads 10 meg on mobile is quite expensive if you consider that. So, you know, cost also becomes a problem. You know, for them, having access to the service might be too expensive from that perspective.
Yeah. Or even, you know, I mean, the emotions that you might have for, you know, unoptimized coding that will charge a lot, you know, during your low connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely you have to consider, you know, performance as part of accessibility at some point. And yeah, my last example here was called Dominic, and this person would live in a country where English is maybe not the not the mother tongue, but also maybe not the common language, common spoken language. And on the other hand, more than 80% of the web is in English only. So the fact that, you know, public websites or websites in general don't have translations or don't have video captions with translations for content is in a way also an accessibility problem for a lot of the world. And I just want to share this. There's a link there at the bottom. Microsoft recently created like this very comprehensive PDF of what design inclusivity means for that, or what an inclusive design means for them. And they have a lot of examples like this. They have a lot of very clearly defined categories, and you see here on 3 columns, you have, you know, permanent disabilities, you have temporary disabilities, and you have situational disabilities. So this is the full spectrum, if you want.
Yes, I mean, I totally relate. Even in my coaching sessions, I have the mother with the kids that are entering the screen, you know, and doing all kinds of things. And I was also thinking, you know, I mean, as you're saying temporary disabilities, I was also thinking about, you know, maybe an eye surgery, or, you know, not using an arm, or anything that was like that was also interesting. But we have a question, Alex, and I think that's I think this is important to address now. It has some reactions to that also. Shouldn't the browser tackle the accessibility part? There are specifications for all elements, and it is clear which part of the is actual input.
I think yes and no. It's a very good question, because I also feel that, you know, in general, the browser is a tool, and tooling in general should solve this kind of problems. You know, when you want to build a digital service, you want to think about the business part mainly, and not deal with the details. And yeah, dealing with accessibility in that situation is a detail. I think from the design perspective, that's something that the browser really cannot do much, but rather could just say, this is not well designed, but it cannot fix, for example, bad contrast, or the fact that the touch areas for buttons on touch devices is too small. But on the other hand, yeah, a lot of things and a lot of problems of accessibility are solved by default by HTML and CSS. What usually happens, unfortunately, is that developers get in the way of that. So instead of using the correct semantics for building an HTML page, everybody uses a div everywhere, you know, and instead of using the headings in the right order, everyone uses headings just to make the text bigger. And these are all semantics which are crucial to navigability from the perspective of a screen reader. So yes and no, I guess. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not, but
yeah, we can have several questions upon that, and we'll answer them. But yeah, it's how much of that responsibility you're actually taking on your side as a developer or not. I mean, if you're delegating that to the browser, I think your point is interesting that you know, you might even get in the way of the browser by.
In my experience, it's more about getting educated about this. It's not, you won't have to do a tremendous amount of work to make things happen, because you know, browser specifications are standardized and they are getting better. Of course, they are not perfect. Of course, there's plenty of things to be done. It is my hope that, you know, in the future, browsers will get smarter and smarter from that perspective. But still, there are, you know, fundamental things that can go wrong from the beginning. And once people are educated and don't make these mistakes, from there on, you know, the experience gets better and better for people navigating, for example, with a screen reader.
Cool. Let's go further, I think.
But yeah, one thing, yeah, actually, that we can come back to this maybe for more in-depth questions, maybe at the end once we go through some of the practical parts. So yeah, one thing I want to there is one or like the main point of this presentation and why it's called the human side is that I want to, as you already said in the intro, and I want to emphasize this even more. I think it's in a way our duty as developers to think about, you know, who is behind the screen, right? You can imagine like a two-way relationship, right? But most of the time we only imagine the one way, right? We write the code on one end, or we design the app if we are a designer, or we are part of the product team or software team, and we push, you know, the thing to production. So it's a one-way thing, and then the user just gets that information, service, application, whatever. But there's also the reverse thing, right? Where you go and you try to figure out, you know, how are they interacting with it? Maybe you do user testing, maybe you do market research, whatever it is. And I feel that, you know, developers should be at least aware of, you know, of these personas that are engaging with what they're building. It's the same way as, I don't know, someone, it's the same way as you would care for the things you are building, right? You're not just writing code, you know, to get through the month and get paid at the end. You're writing code because you might care about, you know, what gets built, what gets rendered on someone's screen, and how does that thing affect in a positive or a negative way their life. So this is why I always consider accessibility part of the user experience. And people usually think of user experience as these very fine art of, you know, crafting very beautiful interfaces with nice flows that take you from one place to another, beautiful animations. And yeah, that is part of UX, definitely. But there are a couple of other layers that I want to bring up here. And in order to understand user experience from that perspective, I'm building, I'll come back to this quote later. I want to build the pyramid of the user needs, right? The same way as you have the pyramid of human needs. What if we understand, you know, who are the users at the other end of the line, and what are their needs? And considering what we talked so far, we can pretty much understand at this point that, you know, accessibility and availability is the fundamental thing, right? Is the basis of the pyramid. If you don't have that, then you block access to the service completely, right? It doesn't matter what you build on top. It doesn't matter if you have beautiful animations. If someone is not able to, you know, to get any information from that because you don't have any support for screen reader, then for that category of users, it's for nothing. On top of that, you have safety and privacy, which is probably one of the hottest topics at the moment in tech. When it comes to, you know, data privacy, when it comes to data security and service security in general. once you have accessibility to the service, you need to have, you need to feel safe about, what Facebook or whatever other service does with my data. And unfortunately, not everyone feels safe about that for good reasons. And then you have convenience and cost. What I said before, right? Performance, things like, I need quick access to this service, but I'm on a bad connectivity network. Do I have to wait 30 seconds behind the spinner just to see some information? How much does it cost to access this or that website? These are also things that kind of are part of the user experience. And there you have the last thing. This is what I called before, the delightful experience, what we traditionally consider to be UX. And if you draw the line here, like at the top, the things below the line are actually just user expectations, right? They don't come and say specifically, I want this and this and that. They just expect that any service provides that. And on top of that is maybe the things that they would, have some expectations for. So this is from my perspective, the pyramid, and this is kind of why I think we need to, really understand those needs, and we need to, dedicate time to address those needs for the users. And unfortunately, as always, in a lot of situations, it happens the other way around, where we dedicate time on the other way, right? And we build a pyramid that is, first of all, hard to balance. And we spend a lot of time on that delightful experience and less time on these things which are at the basis. So they are fundamental to the user experience.
That's a very strong point there, and I know from my conversations that it is mostly the how this is beautifully designed first, and then then go into the other steps. And it's like if I can make the analogy with my field of expertise, which is training and coaching, is like, returning the Maslow pyramid. So it's not addressing the needs first, and then you go to self-actualization. And the beautiful part, it's addressing that first, and you don't cater the intimate needs and the needs for safety and protection and everything else.
Yeah, and the thing is that the deeper you go with these responsibilities, the more connected you actually are with your users, and the more you understand, why are they coming to your service, what, how you can better address their needs, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, since it's been already, I think, half an hour or so, I think we can jump a bit to the practical part, and I will go through some slides that give you some ideas of, what are the primary things that, can or should be improved in terms of accessibility, or what are the things you should, maybe care about for a very generic, let's say, web project. It's not a complete list, of course. It's just maybe some of the things here are maybe some of the low-hanging fruits of accessibility, if you want. And I have three categories that I want to split here, especially because when you talk about when you bring up accessibility, and where you go and talk with an expert in accessibility, they will give you references to all sorts of documentations or very long checklists of things you need to do. And in my opinion, it's better to have some sort of structure in mind. So one category is the visual accessibility category. So this is, we're not talking at all here about screen readers. We're not talking about, using the, we're talking about the general interaction, the same interaction as most of us probably have with the web. But from the visual perspective, what could be some of the problems in terms of accessibility? And the biggest offender of accessibility usually is color contrast. Because we tend to think, again, everyone has kind of, maybe works or accesses the services that we create from the same devices that we do, or everyone, you tend to test on your own machine, right? And if it works well, if it looks well on your machine, it might look well on most of the devices, but it's not often the case. And color contrast is one of the biggest offenders, because there are a lot of situations in which it fails. Color contrast is defined as the ratio between the text color or the foreground color and the background color. And of course, black on white is the highest contrast. And as you go with lighter and lighter shades of black, you get less contrast. The problem comes, of course, when you have also colors in here. So you have all sorts of combinations. Red on certain colors doesn't create enough contrast to be visible or to be readable. And there are a couple of standards called the AA and the AAA standard. And there's a ratio of 3.1 that you should follow in order to make sure that the text is visible in more than just the regular condition. If you want to go the extra mile, there's a AAA, which is I think 4.5 or something like that ratio. So you can make sure that works for all your combinations of text over background. You should prioritize for text, and there are a lot of tools for text, of course, because things like borders and separators are not that relevant. They are visible even in lighter colors. But on the other hand, text should be visible, and text is mostly the main information that you present outside of media, maybe. So there are a lot of tools that check these things, contrast, and also in the browser you can check and you can adjust your colors based on the contrast ratios, so that you can build color palettes that go well with each other. Another thing to consider is color blindness. So one of the most predominant disabilities in the world is color blindness, which apparently happens more with males than with females. It's a medical statistic. So in people with color blindness have this problem of not being able to clearly identify some shades of the red-green spectrum. It's not that they see, we have this, again, misconception that they see red as green and green and red as red. It's actually just they don't see differences between certain shades of green and red because of the spectrum of light and how red and the red and green waves are pretty close to each other. So it's a disability of the eye. Hence, it is always a good idea when you have forms, when you have things like that, and you use red to signal a problem, to also have some sort of visual indicator, like an icon or something, because otherwise people might not figure out that there is a problem for that particular field. And as an asterisk here, it can also be a cultural thing. Not all cultures associate, red with something bad. So again, having a clear indicator, having a clear, message, pictogram or something really helps in a lot of situations. And there's a link there at the bottom with a lot of these practices of what does it mean, what does it mean to build, to have color accessibility in your products when you design them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a quick note on typography also, because we talked about the visual part. Text should be at minimum 16 pixels. This is actually a requirement especially for mobile devices, and there is no official information about this, but at some point there was a clear guideline that any text below 16 pixels will be a penalty in terms of SEO index. I know they are always kind of working on this and adjusting this, but keep that
Alex, we do have a comment here, and it was about the text contrast. That's why I'm interrupting. They say that must be above 4 to 5, and UI and graphical elements 3 to 1.
Yeah, it depends also on the. I think I didn't mention this. It depends on the size of the text as well. If it's big text, it's much easier to see it even in lower contrast ratios. So it's not. This is the thing. It's not always a mathematical thing that you can apply. It's also a thing of design and really trying to understand how these things work with each other. Another good example is when you use a phone and you're in a sunny day outside. You know that as good as contrast if you can have on the screen, you still have a very hard time trying to figure out what's written there. So it's also a matter of experimenting and understanding whether your interface is well designed from that perspective or not. But yeah, I agree, and especially for smaller text, it should be as high as possible. It should probably pass the AAA standard if possible. Okay, so in terms of typography, there are a bunch of practices when it comes to writing text. For me, the biggest thing is just to make sure you always have a minimum font size, especially if you are interested in things like and search engine optimization. There are, of course, practices for readability. Actually, paragraphs and reading text can be very tiring for the eyes, and some people get tired much faster than others, depending on on their eyesight, on certain other things. And having 80 characters per line at most, and having standard letter spacing can really help this, because the eye and the font faces, the way in which they are designed for readability first. So the eye gets used to a certain standard. The same thing if you use, for example, text to justify. It's one of the bad practices of readability, because I'm pretty sure you experienced this, where it's very hard to follow a line that is stretched with the justify alignment. Yeah, another link at the bottom with typography practices. And finally, one thing which people don't really know about is that animations can be harmful for people. There's a thing called vestibular disorder, which is a problem with the internal ear, the equilibrium center of the human body. And people can have problems when they are presented with very fast animations or unexpected movements. They can get everything from feeling dizzy, nausea, and even if they have more serious problems, it could trigger things like seizures, for example. So one thing to consider when building animations is that you shouldn't have this kind of parallax or scroll to effects, which are very unexpected movements, in the screen. When I'm scrolling down, I'm trying to, my eye is set on the main content. And when my peripheral view starts seeing all these elements moving left and right, you tend to get that dizziness effect. Of course, not everyone gets it, but for me personally, the scroll effect actually does have a certain effect that is really annoying. I cannot say that I get this or anything, but I get the annoyance. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people have a worse experience navigating that. Unexpected transitions, as I mentioned. And if you do want to keep your animations for users, but not for those who don't want those kind of animations, most operating systems on mobile and desktop have the setting to disable motion. It disables, common animations in the operating system. And now we have a media query for that in the browser called preferred reduced motion. And for that media query, we can remove certain animations or make them smaller, or make them, just friendly from that perspective. And there are two links here at the bottom. And especially the second one is a really nice one if you want to read more about what does it mean to build a safe web animation, for people with motion sensitivity. It's quite interesting to research this topic.
So you'll, because I mean, I was saying at the beginning that this is one of the reasons that we're doing this by subscription is also because you can get the deck of the links and all resources, which was harder on the live part. So you also get that in the end.
Yeah, and I can also send, I think some of these resources are also in one of my lists that I have saved. Somewhere we can attach it maybe as a,
yeah, they'll be sent by emails with Florentina.
Okay, I will move on to the second. So this was the visual part. The second category of problems is the semantics. This is where we get into more into the support for screen readers, which is a major point or a major topic of accessibility. And for those who don't know, there is at the browser level something called the accessibility tree that is built based out of the DOM tree. So screen readers don't parse the DOM tree as you see it in the if you inspect the page. They actually create what is called an accessibility tree based on the accessibility information from the DOM tree, and that tree is then used by assistive technology to have to parse the information and to basically the browser or the software will speak out loud the different parts of the content, different tags. It will specify whether it's a list. It will specify all sorts of navigation shortcuts if you want to jump, the header section if you want to jump to the main part and stuff like that. So the first thing is to make sure you have page semantics, right? If you're building a page which has some navigation at the top or a header, has some content in the middle, which is the main article or something, has a footer, then make sure you use these tags. They are not, from the technical perspective, they can be, of course, replaced with a div. You can work with divs and they will show up the same way for a sighted user. But for someone using a screen reader, they will have to go through all of these landmarks just to find out which is the main content of the page, right? When you see a website, a web page, immediately your eyes jump to the main content, right? If you open a Medium article, if you open any newspaper, online newspaper or something. But for someone using a screen reader, they need these kind of navigational landmarks to be able to quickly jump to the main part, quickly jump to the navigation if they want to go to another page, and so on. It's called a div fest. Maybe you heard of this, maybe not. When everything is a div, right? You wrap all your components, everything you build for the web is in a div, and you end up with this div soup, which is unfortunately very common. At work, in an unrelated task, I had to go through. We had to do some analysis of like 10,000 websites, snapshots of websites from production, and it's amazing how many of them are just divs of divs of divs of divs. It's really sad in a way because it automatically makes them less accessible or less friendly for screen readers. Headings in the right order, I already mentioned this. An H1 is not necessarily an H1 because it's the biggest text on the screen, but rather because it's the main title of that particular page. And there are a lot of other rules, like not using multiple H1s unless you have separate articles, which are separate parts of the page, and so on. So I don't want to get through all of this because it takes too long. But yeah, there are certain labels, there are certain HTML tags that will help the screen readers and will, of course, at the end of the day, help the users navigate and have a much smoother experience on your website. In terms of menus, these should be built always with the nav element and with list elements. If you have multiple elements in the menu, if you have drop-down menus or sub-menus, they should always be lists with list items so that the user is so that the screen reader can say, hey, this is a list of 5 elements, you are on the first element, now you're on the second element, and so on. rather than just have a div, and then it will be just raw text written out without any other context or understanding. There's a link there at the bottom about how to build the accessible menu system, which is really well documented on Smashing Magazine. And yeah, nevertheless should be, of course, keyboard accessible, because if things are not keyboard accessible, they are probably also not accessible to screen readers. So avoid things like opening menus on a mouse over, because a screen reader user will most likely not use a mouse to navigate the website.
And I do have a question from Raluca here. I think it's one the other related to the structure. Is the skip to main content link a good practice?
Yes, it is. For those who haven't seen one of these, you can actually experience it. For example, I know Smashing Magazine, I gave this example, they have an implementation. The first thing that you focus on when you use a keyboard, for example, if you hit tab, as soon as you enter the page, you will see that a hidden link pops up that when you press enter on it or space, it will get you to the main content. These are called skip links. So in order to further aid screen readers, when they first end up on the page, the first thing they hit on is the skip links, and they are asked if they want to follow the skip link to the main part or to some other parts if you have multiple skip links in the page. And yes, they are a very, very welcomed addition to any page. I actually saw a lot of people, and I saw especially there are a few, not a lot of them, but there are a few very popular advocates of accessibility that are web developers themselves, and they use screen readers because they either lost their site or they were never, or they never had it, and they use that a lot. And they speak a lot about how much it helps, to have shortcuts and to always be able to quickly navigate, because the problem is, the time they need to get there, to wrap their heads around what's there in the page. So yeah, I hope I answered this question. It's a definitely yes. Okay, should we move on?
Yeah.
Just quickly, I want to also have time to get to the end here. So for images and links, it's also important to have clear titles and clear alt attributes for that. It's another problem of screen reader. If you don't put, for example, an alt attribute for an image, then the screen reader will go ahead and read the name of the image. And this is very unpleasant because most of the images on the web have names like XD4F67 and so on, like a huge random name. And that gets read, right, by the screen reader, which is really annoying. And also you should avoid overusing things like click here and read more. These are very common parts of the text to be placed in links. But again, for screen reader users, for advanced screen reader users, they prefer to quickly navigate, for example, over the links of the page. And if all your links in the page, if, for example, you have a list of articles and all the action, all the call to actions are click here, or read more, this is the only thing they will hear, right? They will just tab their way through the interface and just hear read more. Whereas, as you see here, I took a screenshot from the JSHeroes website. When we implemented it, we specifically made dynamic titles for the links, so that when you hover, when you're focusing on a speaker, the screen reader will say visit the page of and the name of the speaker, instead of click here or read more or something like that. Okay. Any questions for this section? Semantics, if not, I don't see.
I think we were good with the questions. Yeah.
We can, come back and answer them at the end.
Yeah.
The last section here is really, really short on interaction. keyboard navigation is important. Again, I said from two perspectives. First, for the screen readers, but also for a lot of situations that we already talked about where you might use your keyboard to navigate. And as you see here in the videos I showed, it's very important to be able to replicate what I would do with the hover effect. So when this is CSS tricks, when you hover over the card, they have this kind of animation that they bring it to front. And it's very important as I'm using the keyboard to also get that kind of interaction. There are a lot of things here. I don't want to get into detail now, but you should, when you see a model window, for example, you should have on escape it should close, on enter it should be the main action, things like that. There's no exhaustive list of all the things that all the keyboard navigation mechanism that you need, but there are a few common things that are useful to be implemented. And by the way, here is one of the examples where the browser has support for something like this by default. A lot of tags have some sort of support for this. It's just that we don't use the right tags, so you need to build usually the support from scratch. One thing I want to add here is the outline thing. So you might have saw there on the in here when you navigate, I'm not sure if it's visible on the video, it's pretty small, but you have this outline. So when you're navigating with the keyboard, you know where your focus is. This is something you don't need when you have a mouse, right? Or use a trackpad. But people using keyboards need to be aware of where their cursor is in the page. And by setting things like outline 0 or outline none, you're breaking the experience for them. Luckily, there is a new pseudo selector called Focus Visible, which was just standardized. There's a library that also can help you with this, but now that Focus Visible is here, you can actually specify a different kind of outline for keyboard users and a different one. So when, for example, someone clicks a button, the same effect will not happen, because usually that's why you remove this outline. You don't want these browser default effects in your application. But with Focus Visible, you can actually keep those effects for keyboard and remove them in other situations. And we talked about focus. If possible, you should accompany, the hover effect. So when coming back to that example, when you hover, when you have some sort of animations over hover, you should make sure that the focus interaction also somehow triggers the same animations. Tab index should be the natural flow. There is no need to, I don't see any need for which you don't want your natural order of tabs if you go through a form or something like that. And for in some cases it's important to have focus traps. For example, when you have a model window open, you don't want the user to go behind the screen or to scroll or to move the screen in the background. You want to keep the focus in the model window. Finally, touch area. I already mentioned this, I think. There are some guidelines here for how big elements or how small elements should be. I think Apple has this thing called the human interface guidelines, where they specify that all touch elements need to be at least 44 pixels by 44 pixels wide. So even if you have a smaller icon, button, text, whatever there, the touch area should be enlarged to be at least 44 by 44, because this is a good size that anyone with any kind of touch capabilities can use and can operate properly. And think about again what we talked about, aging people or people with certain disabilities and so on. Okay.
I do have a question from Tudor, which is logistical. Yeah. Can you send the presentation after the event? I don't know if that's is the deck or the presentation. Yeah.
The deck is
with the presentation also. Okay, good.
Yeah. All the links will be available. Anyway, I will leave on the last slide is my Twitter handle. Feel free to write, contact me, DM me if you want, if you need any resources or you think you want any other help on this side. I'm looking forward to share all my knowledge here. At the end of the slides here, I just have a couple of references to software or tooling that you can use for accessibility. These are common or popular screen readers that you can use to test applications. Xcore is a library that can be integrated on top of your integration or end-to-end tests and gives you all sorts of accessibility violations while analyzing the website in your local host. So you get to, for example, you could fail your build when accessibility violations happen. So this way you don't have to, end up in production with the problems and have to fix them later. Lighthouse is the tool by Google. It's integrated in Chrome now under the audits tab, so you can audit the accessibility there as well. There's another tool called Totally by Khan Academy. All these tools show you different things. They have also overlapping things. I just put them here, so maybe you find one that suits better for your product. And finally, two projects which are really interesting. Rich UI and inclusive components. They are sets of components built for the web that are already, have accessibility baked in. There are a lot of more examples like this. These are just the first two I had in mind while building this. But yeah, let me know if you have any other, if you know any other. I actually should add here for people that are using React. There's a new React ARIA library built by Adobe, which has all sorts of hooks and concerns related to accessibility and building accessible components. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty much my presentation. I just want to leave you with this quote that I kind of made up. Someone was saying at some point that they are doing a favor to the user because they are working on accessibility, and it's my strong opinion that it's just about doing, our job and making sure that we care about our work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alex. That was very informative, and thank you to Pentalog that they organized this to happen. I hope we'll have you again in some other presentations along the PentaBARs live, or I hope that next year there'll be also, face-to-face meetups as there used to be in the history of PentaBAR. A final question for that, how should companies tackle accessibility if they have no prior experience? What's the first thing they could do?
It's a good question, I guess. It depends probably on the company. If they are, if it's a product company, I think they should just try to figure out what their users are, because I guess that's important from the business perspective as well. So I don't see why you shouldn't necessarily care about accessibility. So probably a good starting point is simply to get people educated, especially the front-end developers that work on a daily basis with the interface, the designers as well, because most of these problems can come from the design phase. And overall, for companies and for teams or individuals doing software, I think it's important to not leave accessibility as an afterthought. The same way you don't necessarily leave, security or performance as an afterthought, right? You ship a product and then you say, oh, let's, transition to HTTPS, or let's make sure we don't have SQL injection here. It's just something that you need to, bake in as you're iterating over the product, and not leave it in the last stage, like a waterfallish process. So. And
I believe that the first questions that we've parked was somehow answered in the best practices, to roll out accessibility, and I think they are in the practices that you showed. But there is another it's related to what I asked you now. It's how to build empathy about accessibility with the dev team. How would you manage that? You know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think I honestly think people have empathy by default. Like, I mean, it's just something that you probably need to tap into. It's not something that you need to really work really hard to get it. There might be exceptions, of course, as always, but I think that even presenting, use cases and stories of, how people are using using your product, using your interface, maybe. I don't know. I know of companies that, for example, invite people with certain disabilities to workshops with the design team and the development team to interact and really understand what's the feedback, how was their experience. And I think that kind of connection really gets you into this. It's true that if you just present it as a list of things you need to do, it will just be a list of things you need to do and you won't care that much. So yeah, I think you need these stories somehow to be told.
So thank you again, Alex. Thank you again, Pentalog. I hope to hear from you again. You have the link for the next PentaBARs here in Florentina. The next one next week will be in Vidam, and in 2 weeks time we'll do another one. So stay tuned. You'll find the subjects along the way. Thank you very much for sharing all of this, and I do hope
Thank you for having me.
Luck with the community. That's a noble mission that you're embarked to. Thank everyone for having the time, because this is a learning journey, and the interest in that in this part is noble by itself. Thanks.
Bye.
And bye. Have a great day.